Hey, 4th and 5th graders, I miss you. I know I say that every time, but it's true. Can you believe we only have, I think, 22 days left of school? For all you 5th graders out there, I'm thinking really hard about you and how you're about to transition out of Jefferson. You have to come back and visit me, but I'll be back on video, okay? This isn't my last week. 4th graders, can't wait to see you next year. Today, we have something really important to talk about. It kind of builds off of what we talked about last week. Who remembers what we talked about last week? That's right. We talked about positive affirmations. We talked about self-esteem. Okay, so we talked about how do we make sure that we are using positive self-talk? How do we turn those negative thoughts into positive thoughts so that our self-esteem builds and we get stronger and stronger? So this kind of goes along with that, but this is a little bit simpler in the sense that this week's theme is you are enough. And what that means is the way that you are is awesome. You are special. You are unique. Unique means you are different than every single other person in the world. When you think about it that way, it's kind of amazing, okay? Everybody on this planet has something to offer. In other words, there's something about you that's really special that you bring with you every day to the world that nobody else can bring because there's only one you. So this week I'm going to do a read aloud. It's a little longer than normal, but it's really good. And it talks about how one girl figured out that just by being herself, she was enough to do what she wanted to do. Okay? So let's read this book and then we'll talk about a little writing activity that I want to do with you afterwards. This book is called Grace for President. Anybody ever read it? It's so good. Okay. It's written by Kelly, I hope I say this right, DiPuccio. And the pictures are by Layen Pham. All right. Grace for President. One Monday morning in September, Mrs. Barrington rolled out a big poster with all the president's pictures on it. Grace Campbell could not believe her eyes. Where are the girls? That is a very good question, said Mrs. Barrington. The truth is, our country has never had a woman president. No girl president? Ever? Grace asked. No, I'm afraid not, said Mrs. Barrington. Grace sat at her desk and stewed. No girls? Who'd ever heard of such a crazy thing? Finally, she raised her hand. Yes, Grace? I've been thinking it over and I'd like to be president. Several students in the class laughed. Well, I think that's a star-spangled idea, Grace, said Mrs. Barrington. In fact, we can have our own election right here at Woodrow Wilson Elementary. The snickering in the room stopped. Grace smiled. Would anyone else like to run for president? Mrs. Barrington asked the class. Nobody raised their hand. Becoming president was going to be easy, Grace thought. The next day, Mrs. Barrington made an announcement. In the name of democracy, I have invited Mr. Waller's class to join our election. Their class has nominated Thomas Cobb to be their presidential candidate. Grace's heart sank. Thomas was the school spelling bee champion. His experiments always took a blue ribbon at the science fair, and he was captain of the soccer team. Becoming president wasn't going to be so easy after all, Grace thought. The teachers put the names of all 50 states and the District of Columbia into a hat. Everyone except for Grace and Thomas got to choose a state. I'm Texas, said Anthony. I'm New Hampshire, said Rose. I'm Michigan, said Robbie. What does the number 16 mean? Each state is assigned a number of electoral votes. That number is determined by how many people live in that state, said Mrs. Barrington. Each of you will be a representative for your state. Altogether, our country has 538 electoral votes, Mr. Waller explained. On election day, the candidate who receives 270 electoral votes or more wins the election. Why 270, asked Rose. That's more than half of all the electoral votes, Mr. Waller said. Becoming a president really wasn't going to be so easy, Grace thought. Grace came up with a campaign slogan, "Make history, vote Grace Campbell for president." Thomas came up with his own campaign slogan, "Vote for Thomas Cobb, the best man for the job." Grace listened to what issues were important to the students, and she made a list of campaign promises. A peaceful school, no bullies. A cleaner school, no littering. Better hot lunches, no more fish stick tacos. Thomas made up his own list of promises. Free tutoring, free soccer lessons, fish stick tacos every week. Grace made campaign posters and buttons. Thomas made posters and buttons too. They're both working hard. Each week, the teachers set aside time for the candidates to meet with their constituents. Polls were taken. Voters were making their choices. Grace continued to campaign. At recess, she gave speeches. During lunch, she handed out free cupcakes. After school, she held rallies. Meanwhile, Thomas wasn't worried. He had cleverly calculated the boys held slightly more electoral votes than the girls. At recess, Thomas studied his spelling words. During lunch, he worked on his latest science experiment. After school, he played soccer. Even before the election, Grace made good on her promises. She joined the safety squad, she organized a school beautification committee, and she volunteered her time in the school cafeteria. She was busy. In early November, Woodrow Wilson Elementary hosted a special Election Day assembly. Grace and Thomas took their places on stage as the school band began to play. Henry was the first representative to approach the microphone. The Yellowhammer State of Alabama cast its 9 electoral votes for Thomas Cobb. Fletcher said, the last frontier state of Alaska cast its 3 electoral votes for the best man for the job, Thomas Cobb. Hannah called out, the Grand Canyon state of Arizona cast its 11 electoral votes for Grace Campbell, and so it went. State after state after state after state cast their electoral votes. The scoreboard in the gymnasium kept track of the totals. The voting demonstration was quickly coming to an end. Clara approached the podium. The Badger state of Wisconsin cast its 10 votes for my best friend, Grace Campbell. Grace looked at the scoreboard. Thomas had 268 electoral votes. She had 267. There was only one state still unaccounted for, Wyoming. Thomas grinned. Grace felt sick. Sam walked up to the microphone. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Grace. He looked down at Grace's handmade flag. Sam didn't say a word. What are you waiting for? Thomas whispered. The band stopped playing. All eyes were on Wyoming. Finally, Sam cleared his throat. The Equality State of Wyoming cast its 3 electoral votes for Grace Campbell. The gymnasium erupted in loud cheers and a few boos. Mrs. Barrington approached the podium. With 270 electoral votes, the winner is Grace Campbell. Thomas looked stunned. Grace hugged Sam. Why did you do it? She asked. Sam handed Grace his flag. Because, he said, I thought you were the best person for the job. The following week, students in Miss Barrington's class were preparing for their career day presentations. Grace volunteered to go first. She stood at the front of the room and glanced at the posters still hanging on the wall. My name is Grace Campbell, and when I grow up, I'm going to be President of the United States. This time, everyone believed that she would. The end. There's a picture of her as an adult. What did you think of the book? I like it too. It's one of my favorites. So let's talk about Grace, okay? So here's Grace. Did she actually get what she wanted? Yes, she did. Was she still absolutely herself in getting what she wanted? Yes, she was. Did she have to work really hard to get what she wanted? She did. Did it pay off? Did it work? It did, okay? Was she kind? Yes. Was she respectful? Yes. Okay. She tried her best as well, and it paid off. Okay. When you try your best, when you're kind, when you go for something that you want and when you stay yourself, when you are enough, it pays off. It really makes a difference, okay? So Grace was enough to win for president, even though we don't know about her school, right? But in theory, maybe she was the first girl president at her school. We just don't know. In the United States, there's never been a woman president, okay? Some women have tried, and they've tried their best, and they still feel good about what they did. Now, let's say that Grace didn't win, okay? Would it still be okay that she tried? Absolutely. Is she still enough? Yes, she's still enough. She's still awesome, awesome Grace. She's still herself. So this week, I want you to practice writing things down that you like about yourself, okay? And then I want you to think about something that you really want and how you're gonna try and get it. Realizing, even if it doesn't happen, that you were still yourself, that you were still kind and respectful and still enough, okay? So, 2 things that I wrote down. I like my jokes. I like my hair. I am enough, okay? So this is simple, and I want you to start simple, but I want you to build off of this. So this is something I want you to write in your journal, okay? Hopefully you have I'm sure you have a journal with your teacher. Even if you don't, just start one or get a piece of paper, and that can be the start of your journal. I want you to start, maybe you're gonna use the same paper journal that you used for the writing we did last week too. You can do that too, okay? But I really, really like these. These are a little bit different than positive affirmations because right off the bat, you're just talking about the things about yourself, okay? So even though I do get my hair cut and I like to design my haircut, the kind of hair that I have, did I have control over that when I was born? Nope, I was just born with the kind of hair I had, okay? The joke part, was I born making up jokes? Maybe, maybe not, but I've worked on them and I make sure that I'm kind and I try my best. And that's how I know that I am enough, okay? So thanks for listening this week, 4th and 5th graders. You are enough, you are amazing, you are unique. I know that you are trying your hardest and trying your best. In fact, I've talked to many of your teachers and they're telling me how impressed they are with how much you are trying, okay? That's the most you can do right now in this different and sometimes hard situation. Miss you. See you next week.